The hemp fibers slipped through Lydia Rennick's calloused fingers like silk made rough, each strand finding its place in the growing rope as naturally as water finding its way downhill. And she wondered if the cowboy watching from across the dusty street of Skidoo, California, could see the tremor in her hands that had nothing to do with the work and everything to do with the way his eyes seemed to burn right through her in the scorching July heat of 1882. She had been making rope in this mining town for 3 years now, ever since her father died in a shaft collapse and left her nothing but his trade and a small wooden workshop on the edge of town where the desert wind carried sand that got into everything. Lydia was 22 years old and had hands that told the story of every rope she had ever twisted, every fiber she had ever coaxed into strength. The miners needed rope constantly, and she supplied it, working from dawn until her oil lamp guttered out at night, twisting hemp and sisal into lifelines that descended into the earth's dark belly. The cowboy had been watching her for 3 days now. She noticed him the first morning when she opened her workshop shutters to let in the cool pre-dawn air. He stood beside his paint horse, one boot propped against a hitching post, hat tilted low but not low enough to hide those eyes. Gray eyes, she thought, though the distance made it hard to be certain. He wore dusty leather chaps over dark trousers and a shirt that might have been blue once but had faded to the color of a winter sky. Lydia tried to ignore him as she worked, her fingers moving in the practiced dance of the rope maker. She took 3 strands of hemp, each already twisted clockwise, and began twisting them together counterclockwise, the opposing tensions creating strength that could hold a horse, support a miner, pull a wagon from a ditch. Her father had taught her that rope was about balance, about forces working against each other to create something unbreakable. By the afternoon of the 3rd day, her curiosity overwhelmed her practiced caution. She set down the rope she was working on, wiped her hands on her canvas apron, and stepped out into the relentless California sun. The heat hit her like a physical thing, and she squinted across the street to where the cowboy still stood, patient as stone. "You planning to buy rope or just admire the process?" she called out, surprised by the steadiness of her own voice. The cowboy pushed off from the hitching post and crossed the street with an easy, rolling gait that spoke of years in the saddle. As he got closer, she saw she had been right about his eyes, gray as creek stones and just as hard to read. He was tall, built lean and strong like a man who lived on jerky and hardtack more often than proper meals. A scar cut through his left eyebrow, giving his face a slightly dangerous cast that made her heart beat faster despite herself. "Xander Young, madam," he said, removing his hat to reveal dark hair that needed cutting. "And I am planning to buy rope, but I figured 3 days of watching would tell me if you were worth buying from." Lydia felt her spine stiffen. "And what exactly were you watching for, Mr. Young? How you treat the work," he said simply. "I need rope that will hold in situations where holding means living and breaking means dying. I need to know the person making it cares about every twist, every fiber. I watched you reject a whole spool yesterday because one section looked weak to you. I watched you work through lunch today to get a splice right. That is the kind of rope maker I need." Despite herself, Lydia felt a flush of pride warm her chest. Few people understood that rope making was more than just a trade. It was a responsibility. Every rope she made carried someone's life in its twisted strands. "What do you need rope for?" she asked, gesturing for him to follow her into the workshop's shade. Inside, the space smelled of hemp and oil, and ropes in various stages of completion hung from the rafters like sleeping snakes. Xander turned his hat in his hands, a gesture that seemed almost nervous. "I run a ranch about 15 miles south of here, raising horses mostly, some cattle. I do a lot of roping work and I go through rope faster than most. I have been buying from a supplier in Bakersfield, but the quality has gotten unreliable. Last month, a rope snapped while I was pulling a calf from a bog. Nearly lost the animal. Lydia nodded, understanding. How much do you need? 200 feet to start, varying thicknesses. If the quality is as good as I think it will be, I will need regular orders. Maybe 500 feet a month. Lydia's breath caught. That was more work than she currently had from all her mining customers combined. It would mean financial security, maybe even enough to expand the workshop, hire an apprentice, but she forced herself to stay practical. That is a lot of rope. I would need to order more hemp, maybe set up another twisting wheel. It would take time to fill the first order. I have time, Xander said, and the way he looked at her made it clear he was not just talking about rope. How long for the first order? 2 weeks, maybe 3 if I want to do it right. I want you to do it right, he said firmly. I will pay half now, half on delivery. And I would like to check on the progress, if you do not mind. Quality matters to me. Lydia knew she should say no, should tell him she would deliver the rope in 3 weeks, and that was all the interaction they needed. But something in those gray eyes made her nod instead. Come by when you like. I work sunrise to sunset most days. Xander smiled, a slow transformation that softened his face and made him look younger, less weathered. I will do that, Miss Rennick. I surely will. He counted out payment in silver dollars that clinked solidly on her work table, then put his hat back on and left. Through the window, Lydia watched him mount his paint horse with fluid grace and ride out of town heading south. She stood there longer than necessary, watching the dust cloud of his passage fade into the heat shimmer, before turning back to her work with fingers that trembled just slightly. That night, she lay awake in the small room behind the workshop, listening to the sounds of Skidoo settling into darkness. The mines ran day and night, and the distant sounds of ore carts and men's voices drifted on the desert air. She thought about Xander Young's gray eyes and the way he had said quality mattered to him, and she wondered if he was lying awake too, 15 miles south, thinking about rope and other things. The next morning, Lydia rode her mule into the larger town of Darwin, 12 miles east, where a freight company kept stock of hemp, sisal, and other rope-making supplies. The freighter, a grizzled man named Tom who had known her father, raised his eyebrows when she ordered 3 times her usual quantity. Big job, he asked, scratching entries in his ledger. Steady customer if this works out, Lydia said. A rancher south of Skidoo. Tom nodded approvingly. Good to diversify. Mining towns like Skidoo, they can dry up fast if the ore runs out. Ranch business is steadier. Lydia had not thought of that, but Tom was right. Skidoo had boomed when silver was discovered in '79, but already some of the smaller operations were closing down. She had been so focused on the day-to-day work of survival that she had not looked ahead to what might happen if the mines failed. The freight would arrive in 4 days. Tom told her. She spent those days finishing existing orders and preparing her workspace for the larger project. She cleaned and oiled her twisting wheels, checked her hemp-hackling tools, organized her workspace for efficiency. She caught herself humming while she worked, old songs her father used to sing, and realized she felt something she had not felt in the 3 years since his death. Excitement about the future. Xander came by on the 3rd day. Lydia was outside, taking advantage of the slightly cooler morning air to hackle hemp, drawing the fibers through a bed of nails to clean and align them. She looked up to see him riding in, and her heart did that strange skip-beat thing again. Morning, he called, dismounting. Thought I would check on progress. I am preparing materials, Lydia said, holding up a handful of cleaned hemp. The bulk of my supply arrives tomorrow, then I can start the real work. Xander walked over to examine the hemp, running it through his fingers with a touch that was surprisingly gentle for a man who worked with horses and cattle. This is good quality fiber. Where do you source it? Freighter brings it up from the coast mostly. Some comes from Nevada. I am particular about what I buy. I noticed, Xander said, and there was that smile again, the one that made his whole face different. You mind if I watch for a bit? I am curious about the process. Lydia gestured to a stool near her work area. It is not very exciting to watch. I will be the judge of that. So Xander sat and watched while Lydia hackled hemp, her arms working in steady rhythm, pulling the fibers through again and again until they lay smooth and aligned. She explained the process as she worked, more to fill the silence than because she thought he cared, but he listened with genuine interest, asking questions that showed he understood the work's intricacy. My grandmother used to spin wool, he said during a break when Lydia paused to drink water. I remember watching her hands move, the way she could feel when the thread was getting too thin or thick just by touch. This reminds me of that. Did she teach you? Lydia asked. She tried. I was too restless as a boy, always wanting to be outside with the horses. I regret that now. She died when I was 15, and all that knowledge died with her, except what my aunt managed to learn. There was real sorrow in his voice, and Lydia felt something in her chest soften. My father taught me this trade. He had no sons, and he said there was no reason a daughter could not twist rope as well as any man. Some of the miners disagreed at first after he died, but rope does not care about the gender of who makes it. It either holds or it does not. And yours holds, Xander said with certainty. Always, Lydia agreed. They fell into a comfortable silence, broken only by the rasp of hemp through the hackle and the distant sounds of the town. Lydia found herself hyper-aware of Xander's presence, the way he sat relaxed but attentive, the way his eyes followed her movements with genuine interest rather than the skeptical or dismissive look she got from most men. Can I ask you something? Xander said eventually. You can ask. Why Skidoo? It is pretty isolated and the mining towns can be rough for a woman alone. Lydia paused in her work. I was born here. My mother died of fever when I was 7 and my father raised me. After he died, I thought about leaving, but this workshop is all I have. The miners know me, trust my work. Starting over somewhere else seemed harder than staying. You ever get lonely? The question was so direct it took her breath. She set down the hackle and met his eyes. Every single day. But lonely with a trade that keeps me fed is better than lonely and starving somewhere else. What about you? Why ranching out here where the desert tries to kill everything that grows? Xander leaned back against the workshop wall. I grew up in Texas, worked trail drives for years. Saved my money, came west looking for land I could afford. Found a valley south of here with a spring that runs year-round. It is hard country, but it is mine. I built every fence, broke every horse, raised every building with my own hands. Some days I am so tired I can barely unsaddle my horse, but it is mine, you understand. Lydia understood completely. That was how she felt about the workshop, about every rope she made. No one can take it from you. Exactly, Xander said. Although running it alone is harder than I thought it would be. I have 2 men who help with the cattle work, but mostly it is just me and the horses and a whole lot of empty space. You ever get lonely? Lydia asked, echoing his question back to him. Xander's gray eyes held hers. Every single day. Until about 3 days ago when I rode into town for supplies and saw a woman with strong hands and serious eyes making rope like it was the most important thing in the world. Then I got a different kind of lonely. The kind that knows exactly what it is missing. Lydia's breath caught in her throat. She had been courted before, in clumsy ways by miners who saw a woman alone and thought she must be desperate. But no one had ever spoken to her like this, with such plain honesty and directness. She did not know what to say. "I am sorry," Xander said, standing up and reaching for his hat. "That was too forward. I should go." "No," Lydia said quickly, surprising herself. "Do not go. No one has ever said anything like that to me before." "Then men around here are fools," Xander said simply. He settled his hat on his head but did not move toward his horse. "I will not press you, but I am going to be honest from the start. I did not come here just for rope, though I do need it. I came because I have not been able to stop thinking about you since the first moment I saw you. If that makes you uncomfortable, I will conduct our business by mail and leave you be." But I had to say it. Lydia's heart hammered so hard she was sure he could hear it. 3 years of loneliness, of working until she was too tired to feel anything, of pushing away her own desires because there was no time for them in a life built around survival. All of it suddenly pressed against her chest like a weight. "I do not want you to leave," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "But I do not know how to do this. I have been alone so long I am not sure I remember how to be anything else." Xander smiled, that slow, warm smile that changed his whole face. "Then maybe we can figure it out together." Slowly. "I am not going anywhere." The freight wagon arrived the next day with Lydia's hemp order, and she threw herself into work with focused intensity. But now, when she twisted the fibers, she thought about what Xander had said about forces working against each other to create strength. Maybe that was what people could be too, she thought. 2 separate threads, each with their own twist, coming together to make something stronger than either could be alone. Xander came by every other day, timing his visits to when she was ready for a break. He never stayed too long, never pressed for more than conversation, but slowly Lydia learned the shape of his life. He talked about his ranch, the Twisted Y, named for the brand he used on his horses. He described the valley with its spring-fed creek, the wild horses he sometimes saw on the ridges, the mountain lion that had taken a calf last winter. He talked about the loneliness of working land that spread farther than he could see, beautiful and harsh in equal measure. Lydia told him about rope making, about how different fibers had different qualities, how hemp was strong but sisal could handle weather better, how the twist direction mattered, how you could feel weak spots in the strand if your hands learned to listen. She told him about her father, about learning to hackle hemp when she was barely tall enough to reach the table, about the day he died, and how the world suddenly became a much colder place. "He sounds like he was a good man," Xander said one evening as the sun painted Skidoo's dusty streets gold and crimson. "He was," Lydia agreed. "He treated me like I had a brain worth teaching, which was more than most fathers did for their daughters. I miss him every day." "I think he would be proud of you. You kept his business going, kept his trade alive. That matters." Lydia had to blink back sudden tears. No one had ever said that to her before. The rope order progressed steadily. Lydia worked with intense focus, checking and rechecking every strand, every splice, every twist. This was more than just a job. It felt like a test, though she was not sure what she was trying to prove or to whom. One afternoon, nearly 2 weeks into the work, Xander arrived with a basket. "I figured you probably work through lunch most days," he said. "I brought food." Inside the basket were thick slices of bread, hard cheese, dried apples, and a jar of what turned out to be honey. "Did you make this bread?" Lydia asked, surprised by its quality. "I did." Living alone, you learn to cook or you starve. It is not fancy, but it will keep you alive. They sat in the shade of Lydia's workshop and ate together, and it struck Lydia that this was the first meal she had shared with anyone in months. Usually she ate standing up, distracted by work, barely tasting the food. But sitting here with Xander, actually savoring the bread and cheese and honey, she realized how much she had let herself fade into just work and survival. "What do you do for fun?" Xander asked suddenly. Lydia laughed, a sound that felt rusty from disuse. "Fun? I am not sure I remember what that is." "That is what I thought," Xander said. "Same for me. We are a pair, are we not? Both of us so focused on surviving that we forgot about living. Is there a difference?" Lydia asked, but she knew there was. She had just been trying not to think about it. "Come out to the ranch," Xander said impulsively. "This Sunday. Let me show you what I am building. We can ride, have a real meal, talk without you having to think about work for a few hours." Lydia's first instinct was to say no, to list all the reasons why she could not spare the time. But then she looked at Xander's face, open and hopeful, and thought about what he had said about forgetting to live. "Yes," she said, "I would like that." Sunday dawned clear and already hot. Lydia closed the workshop for the day, something she almost never did, and changed into her better dress, a simple blue cotton that had been her mother's. She brushed out her hair, usually tied back in a practical bun, and studied herself in the small mirror above her wash basin. She looked nervous, she decided. Nervous and excited and young in a way she had not felt in years. Xander arrived at 8 with 2 horses, his paint and a pretty sorrel mare with a white blaze. "This is Copper," he said, introducing the mare. "She is gentle as a kitten and has an easy gait. I thought you might like her." Lydia had not ridden much since her father died, but it came back to her quickly. They headed south out of Skidoo as the sun climbed higher, riding through landscape that was harsh but beautiful in its starkness. Creosote bushes dotted the sandy earth, and in the distance, the Panamint Mountains rose like a wall against the western sky. "It is about an hour's ride," Xander said, "but the morning is still cool enough to make it pleasant." They talked as they rode, their conversation flowing easily now after weeks of daily visits. Xander pointed out landmarks, told stories about the land, asked Lydia about her childhood in Skidoo. The desert stretched around them, vast and ancient, and for the first time in years, Lydia felt something loosen in her chest, some tight knot of tension and grief and loneliness beginning to unwind. The Twisted Y Ranch appeared gradually as they crested a rise. The valley spread below them, a long stretch of land where a creek caught the sunlight like a silver thread. Cottonwood trees grew along the water, their green shocking against the desert tones. Fences marked off pastures where horses grazed, and buildings clustered near the creek, small but solid-looking. "There it is," Xander said, and Lydia could hear the pride in his voice. "Everything you see I built or am building. The main house, the barn, the corrals. It is not much yet, but it is growing." As they rode closer, Lydia could see the care that had gone into every structure. The fences were straight and strong, the buildings well-proportioned and thoughtfully placed. This was not just shelter thrown up for convenience. This was a man building something meant to last. The house was small, just 3 rooms from what she could see, but it had a covered porch that would catch the evening breeze and real glass windows that must have cost a fortune to freight in. The barn was larger, with a hayloft and good, strong doors. The corrals held at least 20 horses, and Lydia caught her breath at their beauty. These were not scrub ponies but quality animals, well-muscled and alert. "I breed for intelligence and endurance," Xander said, seeing her interest. "Cattle, horses mostly. Animals that can work all day in hard country and still have sense enough to get their rider home safe." They dismounted at the house, and Xander led her inside. The interior was Spartan but clean, with furniture that looked handmade but skillfully done. A stone fireplace dominated one wall and the kitchen area held a good iron stove. What struck Lydia most was the light. Windows on 3 sides filled the space with brightness, making it feel larger than it was. "It is wonderful," she said honestly. "You built all this yourself, most of it." "I had help with the barn raising, but the rest I did alone. Took me 2 years to get it to this point." He gestured around. "I know it is rough. It needs a woman's touch, curtains and such, but the bones are good." Lydia walked to a window that looked out over the valley. From here, she could see the creek winding through the cottonwoods, the horses moving in the pasture, the mountains framing everything like a painting. "It is beautiful, Xander, really beautiful. You should be proud." "I am," he said, coming to stand beside her, "but it is lonely too. Everything I have built, I built for a future I am not sure will come. A ranch this size needs more than one person. It needs a family." Lydia's heart beat faster. She knew what he was really saying, what question he was circling around without quite asking. Part of her wanted to run, to protect herself from the vulnerability of wanting something this much. But another part, the part that had been awakening over the past weeks, wanted to step toward the possibility instead of away from it. "Show me the rest," she said, not quite ready for that conversation yet. They spent the morning touring the ranch. Xander introduced her to his horses, pointing out bloodlines and temperaments with the pride of a parent. He showed her the creek, cold and clear even in summer, fed by a spring that rose in the hills above. He took her to the furthest fence line and pointed out where he planned to expand, his vision for the future written in gestures across the landscape. For lunch, they sat on the porch in the shade while Xander put together a meal of cold chicken, fresh bread, and canned peaches. It was simple food, but Lydia found herself enjoying it more than she could remember enjoying any meal in recent memory. "I have been thinking," Xander said carefully, setting down his plate, "about what I said before about being lonely. I do not want you to think I am just looking for anyone to fill a space in my life. That is not what this is." "What is this?" Lydia asked quietly. "I have been trying to figure that out," Xander admitted. "All I know is that from the first time I saw you working in that shop, concentrating so hard on getting every fiber right, I felt something shift in me. Like I had been walking around with a question I did not know I was asking, and suddenly there you were, and you were the answer." Lydia set down her own plate, her hands trembling slightly. "I am scared," she admitted. "I built my life around not needing anyone, around being able to take care of myself. Opening up to someone feels dangerous." "It is dangerous," Xander agreed. "But is being safe but lonely really living? Or is it just another kind of death, slower but just as final?" His words hit Lydia like a physical blow because they were true. She had been so focused on survival that she had forgotten to consider what she was surviving for. What was the point of making it through each day if the days were all the same, all empty of anything but work? "I do not know how to do this," she said again, the same thing she had told him weeks ago. "Then we will figure it out together," Xander said, also repeating himself. He reached across the small space between them and took her hand. His palm was calloused from rope and reins, as rough as her own, and the touch sent warmth up her arm. No pressure, no rushing. Just two people who are tired of being alone, seeing if maybe they can be less alone together. Lydia looked at their joined hands, at the way her fingers fit between his, and made a decision that felt like stepping off a cliff with no certainty of what lay below. "Okay," she whispered. "Yes, let us try." Xander's smile lit up his whole face. He lifted her hand and pressed his lips to her knuckles, a gesture that was somehow both chaste and intimate. "I will not let you regret this," he said. "I promise you that." The afternoon passed in a warm blur. They walked down to the creek and sat on the bank with their boots off. cooling their feet in the cold water. Xander told her about his plans for the ranch, asking her opinion on things like where to build a new corral or whether to focus on breeding more horses or expanding the cattle operation. No one had ever asked Lydia's opinion on anything beyond rope, and she found she liked being consulted, liked feeling like her thoughts mattered. "What about you?" Xander asked. "What are your dreams beyond the workshop?" Lydia had to think about that. She had spent so long just trying to survive that she had stopped letting herself dream. "I used to think about expanding," she said slowly. "Taking on an apprentice, maybe two, building a reputation beyond just Skidoo, becoming known as the best rope maker in California." "You could do that," Xander said. "You have the skill, you would just need the time and resources to grow." "Time and resources I do not have," Lydia said. "Right now I am barely keeping ahead of the work I have." "What if you had help?" Xander asked. "What if you were not doing it alone?" Lydia looked at him, seeing where his thoughts were going. "You are talking about more than just business help." "I am talking about partnership," Xander said carefully. "In all ways. I am talking about you keeping your workshop, your trade, your independence, but having a partner who supports that instead of trying to take it away. I am talking about combining what we have built separately and making something stronger together." "Like rope," Lydia said softly. "Different strands twisted together." "Exactly like rope," Xander agreed. "You keep your twist, I keep mine, but we come together and make something that will not break." It was too soon, Lydia's practical mind insisted. They had known each other barely 3 weeks. This was crazy, impulsive, dangerous. But her heart, that part of her she had tried to lock away and ignore, was singing yes, yes, yes. "I need time," she said finally. "I need to think about this without you looking at me with those eyes that make it hard to think at all." Xander laughed. "Fair enough. How much time?" "Let me finish your rope order. Let us see how we do with that. If we can work together on that, maybe we can work on other things too." "That is practical," Xander said. "I can be practical, but Lydia, I want you to know I am sure. I have been alone long enough to know the difference between wanting company and wanting someone specific. I want you. Your strength, your skill, your seriousness, the way you bite your lip when you are concentrating, the way you care about doing things right, all of it." Lydia felt tears prick her eyes. "No one has ever wanted me before, not really. They wanted someone convenient or someone to cook and clean, but no one wanted me." "Then they were all fools," Xander said fiercely. "And I am grateful for their foolishness, because it means you are still here, still free, still someone I have a chance with." The ride back to Skidoo that evening was quiet, but it was a comfortable quiet, full of possibility. The sun set behind them, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink and purple that seemed impossibly vivid. Lydia felt like she was seeing the desert with new eyes, noticing its beauty instead of just its harshness. At her workshop, Xander dismounted and helped her down from Copper. For a moment they stood close together, his hands on her waist, her hands on his shoulders. Lydia could feel the heat of him even in the cooling evening air. "Thank you for today," she said. "For showing me your ranch, your dreams, for being patient with me." "Thank you for coming," Xander replied. "For being brave enough to try." He leaned down slowly, giving her plenty of time to pull away if she wanted to, and pressed a gentle kiss to her forehead. It was chaste and sweet and somehow more intimate than anything else they had done. Then he mounted his horse and rode away, leaving Lydia standing in the twilight, one hand pressed to where his lips had been. The next week, Lydia worked with fierce concentration, determined to make this rope order the best she had ever produced. Every strand was checked multiple times, every splice examined, every coil tested. She worked long hours, but now when she paused to rest her hands, she found herself thinking about Xander, about his ranch, about the possibility of a future that held more than just work. Xander came by every day, but true to his word, he did not press her. Instead, he made himself useful, carrying heavy coils of finished rope, helping her organize the workspace, bringing food so she remembered to eat. He worked alongside her in comfortable silence, and Lydia found herself appreciating his presence more each day. On the 10th day, something happened that changed everything. Lydia was working on a particularly tricky splice, combining 3 different rope diameters into a smooth transition when she heard shouting from the street. She looked up to see a crowd gathering near the entrance to one of the mines. "Cave in," someone shouted. "The lucky strike just caved in." Lydia's blood went cold. Cave-ins were every mining town's nightmare. Men could be trapped, injured, killed. And if men were trapped, they would need rope to get them out. A lot of rope, immediately. She ran out into the street, nearly colliding with Jim Bradley, the foreman of the Lucky Strike. "Lydia," he gasped, "we need rope. Every foot you have got. We have got 4 men trapped and the main shaft line just snapped." "How much do you need?" she asked, already mentally inventorying what she had finished. "Everything you can give us. We will pay triple rate, just get it there now." Lydia ran back to her workshop, Xander on her heels. "Tell me what to do," he said. Together they grabbed every finished coil in the shop. Lydia's order for Xander, half-finished personal projects, her emergency backup supplies. Everything. They loaded it onto Xander's horse and Lydia's mule and raced toward the mine. At the mine entrance, chaos reigned. Men shouted orders, dust billowed from the shaft, and the acrid smell of disturbed earth hung heavy in the air. The mine supervisor, a hard-bitten man named Morrison, grabbed the rope as fast as they could uncoil it. "We need someone who knows rope," he shouted. "Someone who can rig this so it will not fail." "I can do it," Lydia said immediately. Morrison looked skeptical. "This is dangerous work, miss." "Maybe you should. I know more about rope than anyone in this town," Lydia cut him off. "I know its limits, its strengths, how to rig it properly. You want those men out alive, you let me help." Morrison looked at Xander, who nodded. "She is right, let her work." So Lydia found herself being lowered into the mine shaft, her hands running along the rope that held her, checking its integrity by feel. The darkness swallowed her, lit only by the lamp on her head, and for a moment fear threatened to overwhelm her. Then her training took over, and she became all business. The cave-in had blocked the main tunnel about 50 feet down. Through the gap at the top of the rubble, she could hear the trapped miners calling. "We are going to get you out," she shouted, "but I need to set up proper rigging first. Do not try to move the rocks yourself. Let us do this carefully." For the next 3 hours, Lydia worked in the dim, dusty shaft, directing men above and below, setting up a pulley system that would let them remove rubble without triggering another collapse. She used every piece of rope she had, every splice technique her father had taught her, every bit of knowledge she had accumulated over years of work. Xander stayed at the top of the shaft, feeding rope down as she needed it, his voice steady and calm whenever she called up questions or instructions. Knowing he was there, reliable and unshakable, gave her courage when the fear threatened to creep back. Finally, as the sun set and lamps were lit all around the mine, the first trapped miner emerged, filthy and shaken but alive. Then the second, the third, and finally the fourth. The crowd that had gathered cheered, and Lydia found herself pulled up out of the shaft and into the clean air above, her legs shaking with exhaustion and released tension. Morrison pumped her hand hard enough to hurt. "You saved those men's lives. The rigging you set up, it held perfectly." "Did not even strain. I do not know how to thank you." "Just pay me for the rope," Lydia said, too tired for false modesty. And tell people that when they need rope for important work, they should come to me." "I will do better than that," Morrison said. "I will make sure every mine in the district knows that you are the best rope maker in California and that I will not buy from anyone else." Xander put his arm around Lydia's shoulders, holding her up when her legs threatened to give out. "Let me get you home," he said quietly. Back at her workshop, Lydia collapsed onto her cot, still in her dust-covered clothes. Xander brought water and made her drink it, then sat beside her, holding her hand. "That was incredibly brave," he said. "And incredibly stupid. You could have been killed." "Those men would have died if the rigging was not done right," Lydia said. "I had the knowledge to save them. How could I not use it?" "You could not," Xander agreed. "That is who you are. You see what needs doing and you do it, regardless of the risk to yourself. It is one of the reasons I love you." Lydia's exhausted brain took a moment to process what he had said. "You love me?" Xander smiled tiredly. "Of course I love you. I think I have loved you since the first day I saw you rejecting that spool of weak hemp. I just did not want to scare you by saying it too soon. But after tonight, after watching you risk your life to save strangers because it was the right thing to do, I cannot not say it. I love you, Lydia Rennick. I love your courage and your skill and your stubborn determination to do things right. I love the way you care about your work and the way you have not let a hard life make you hard. I love you, and I want to spend the rest of my life twisting my future together with yours, unbreakably." Tears spilled down Lydia's dusty cheeks. "That is the most beautiful thing anyone has ever said to me." "Does that mean you might love me back?" Xander asked, vulnerable hope in his gray eyes. "It means I do love you back," Lydia said. "I think I have been falling in love with you since you stood on that street corner for 3 days just to watch me work. I was just too scared to admit it, even to myself. But tonight, down in that mine, all I could think was that I wanted to survive so I could see you again. So I could have a chance at the future you were offering." Xander leaned forward and kissed her, properly this time, his lips gentle on hers. Lydia kissed him back, tasting dust and sweat and promise. When they broke apart, both of them were smiling. "Marry me," Xander said. "I know it is fast. I know we have only known each other a few weeks, but I am sure. I am more sure of this than anything else in my life. Marry me and keep your workshop and your trade. Marry me and we will figure out how to run a ranch and a rope business together. Marry me and let me spend every day for the rest of my life making you happy." "Yes," Lydia said without hesitation. "Yes, I will marry you. I will twist my future with yours, unbreakably." They were married 2 weeks later in a simple ceremony at the small church in Darwin. Lydia wore a new dress that she bought with part of the money from the mine rescue. Simple white cotton with blue ribbons. Xander wore his best clothes and looked so handsome it made her heart hurt. Tom the freighter stood as witness, along with Morrison from the mine, and a handful of Lydia's customers who had become friends. The preacher spoke about the sanctity of marriage, about two becoming one, and Lydia thought about rope, about how her father had taught her that true strength came from different strands working together. That was what she and Xander would be, she thought. Two strong individuals, each maintaining their own integrity but twisted together into something even stronger. After the ceremony, they rode to the Twisted Y Ranch together. Lydia had spent the past weeks preparing, teaching 2 young men from Skidoo the basics of rope making so they could handle simple orders and maintenance while she settled into her new life. She had not closed the workshop, just as Xander had promised she would not have to. Instead, she had expanded it, bringing on help so that she could divide her time between the business and the ranch. The ranch house looked different with curtains in the windows and Lydia's belongings scattered among Xander's. They had merged their lives slowly over the past 2 weeks, learning each other's habits and preferences, figuring out how to share space that had been solitary for so long. That first night as a married couple, they lay together in Xander's bed, now their bed, and talked long into the darkness. They made plans for the future, dreaming together about what they could build. A bigger house someday when they needed more room. More horses, more cattle. Expanding the rope business beyond Skidoo to all the mining towns in the region. Maybe children if they were blessed. Are you happy? Xander asked, his arm around her, her head on his chest. I am terrified, Lydia admitted. But yes, I am happy. Happier than I have been since before my father died. Maybe happier than I have ever been. Good, Xander said, pressing a kiss to her hair. That is all I want. You happy, beside me, building a life together. The first months of marriage were an adjustment. Lydia had to learn to trust someone else with decisions, to compromise, to consider another person's needs alongside her own. Xander had to learn the same lessons. They had arguments, misunderstandings, moments of frustration when their two strong wills collided. But they also had moments of perfect harmony. Mornings when they worked side by side, Lydia in her workshop area that Xander had built onto the house, and Xander in the corrals training horses. Evenings when they sat on the porch and watched the sun set over their valley. Nights when they held each other and marveled at how lucky they were to have found each other. The rope business thrived. Morrison kept his word, and soon Lydia had orders from mines all over the region. She trained her apprentices carefully, teaching them what her father had taught her about quality and care. But the most important orders, the ones where lives hung in the balance, she still handled herself. The ranch thrived too. Xander's horses gained a reputation for intelligence and endurance, and buyers came from as far as Nevada and Arizona to purchase them. He hired 2 more men to help with the work, good solid workers who lived in a bunkhouse Xander built near the barn. A year after their wedding, Lydia realized she was pregnant. She told Xander one evening as they sat by the creek, watching the light fade from the sky. He stared at her for a long moment, then let out a whoop of joy that startled the horses and swept her into his arms. We are going to have a baby, he said, wonder in his voice. You and me, we are going to be parents. Are you ready for that? Lydia asked, suddenly nervous. I have been ready since the day I married you, Xander said. We are going to be good at this. We will make mistakes, sure, but we will figure it out together, just like we have figured out everything else. Their son was born in the spring of 1884, a healthy baby with Lydia's dark hair and Xander's gray eyes. They named him Jacob Rennick Young, honoring Lydia's father and Xander's family both. Holding him for the first time, Lydia felt a love so fierce it was almost frightening. He is perfect, Xander whispered, one finger stroking the baby's impossibly soft cheek. We made something perfect. Motherhood changed Lydia in ways she had not anticipated. She learned to balance her work with caring for Jacob, to be patient when sleep was scarce, to trust her instincts even when she doubted herself. Xander was a devoted father, walking the floor with Jacob when he was fussy, changing diapers without complaint, singing off-key lullabies that somehow worked. The years rolled by, marked by the turning seasons and the growth of their family and their businesses. 2 years after Jacob, they had a daughter, Emma, who had Xander's easy temperament and Lydia's determination. 3 years after that came another son, Michael, wild and reckless and full of laughter. The workshop continued to grow. Lydia's apprentices became masters in their own right, opening satellite workshops in other towns but maintaining the quality standards she had drilled into them. The Rennick name became synonymous with quality rope throughout California and Nevada. The ranch grew too. Xander expanded the herd, built more corrals, added another hand. The Twisted Y became known as the place to go for working horses that would not quit. Together, Lydia and Xander built something that was more than the sum of its parts, a life that honored both their individual strengths and their partnership. Sometimes, on quiet evenings when the children were asleep and the desert wind whispered through the cottonwoods, Lydia would sit on the porch with Xander and marvel at how different her life had turned out from what she had expected. She had thought she would spend her days alone, working until she could not work anymore, surviving but not really living. Instead, she had found love. Real love, the kind that grew stronger with time rather than fading. The kind that weathered arguments and hardships and came out deeper for the wear. She had found partnership, someone who saw her as an equal, who valued her work and her mind as much as her heart. "What are you thinking about?" Xander asked one such evening, reaching over to take her hand. "About how you changed my life," Lydia said. "About how I almost said no when you invited me to the ranch that first time. I was so scared of getting hurt, of wanting something and losing it. If I had let that fear win, I would have missed all of this." "But you did not let fear win," Xander said. "You were brave. You took a chance on us, on me. That is what I love most about you, your courage." "You make me brave," Lydia said. "Knowing you are beside me, I feel like I can handle anything." "That is how I feel about you," Xander replied. "We make each other stronger, like rope." "Like rope," Lydia agreed, smiling. Their children grew. Jacob showed an aptitude for working with horses, often following Xander around the corrals from the time he could walk. Emma, surprisingly, took to rope making, her small hands learning to twist fibers with a concentration that reminded Xander of Lydia. Michael bounced between interests, curious about everything and master of nothing yet, but happy in his explorations. When Jacob was 12, Lydia taught him what her father had taught her. That rope was about balance, about different forces working together to create strength. She showed him how to check fibers for weakness, how to feel the quality of a twist, how to splice two ropes so seamlessly that the join was stronger than the original strand. "Why is it so important to do it right?" Jacob asked one day, frustrated by the painstaking precision required. "Because people trust their lives to the rope you make," Lydia said seriously. "If you make weak rope because you were lazy or careless, someone could die. Your grandfather taught me that every rope you make is a promise that it will hold when it is needed most. That is a sacred trust." Jacob nodded, understanding settling over his young face. After that, his work improved dramatically. He would never be a rope maker himself. Lydia could see that. His heart was with the horses like his father. But he understood the importance of quality work, of keeping promises, of doing things right even when it was hard. Emma, on the other hand, took to rope making like she had been born to it. By the time she was 14, she could produce work that matched Lydia's own. "She has the gift," Lydia told Xander one night. "The way my father said I did. She feels the work in her hands, knows instinctively when something is not right." "Will you teach her the business?" Xander asked. "Make her your successor if she wants it," Lydia said. "I will not force it on her like some burden, but if she wants to learn, I will teach her everything I know." Emma did want it. She absorbed every lesson, asked endless questions, pushed herself to master every technique. By the time she was 16, she was handling orders on her own, and customers commented that they could not tell the difference between her work and her mother's. Michael, the youngest, found his own path. He had a head for numbers and organization that neither Lydia nor Xander possessed. At 15, he started managing the business side of both the rope workshop and the ranch, tracking inventory, negotiating with suppliers, keeping books that actually made sense. "I do not know where he got this from," Xander said, bemused by his son's neat columns of figures. "Neither of us can manage a ledger to save our lives." "Maybe my mother," Lydia said. "Father always said she was the one who kept the business running while he just made rope. Maybe it skipped a generation." Time moved forward as it always did. The children became adults, making their own decisions, forging their own paths. Jacob married a girl from Darwin and built his own place on the far side of the ranch, raising horses and starting his own family. Emma took over more and more of the rope business, opening a new workshop in Lone Pine and another in Bishop, expanding the reputation that Lydia had built. Michael went east for a while, learning modern business practices in San Francisco, then came back to apply what he had learned to the family enterprises. Under his management, both the rope business and the ranch became more profitable than they had ever been. Lydia and Xander grew older together, their hair turning gray, their bodies showing the wear of decades of hard work. But their love, that thing that had started with 3 days of watching and a conversation about rope, only grew stronger. They still sat on the porch in the evenings, still held hands, still talked about everything and nothing. "You ever regret it?" Xander asked one evening when they were both in their 50s, watching their grandchildren play in the yard. "Giving up your independence, tying your life to mine?" Lydia turned to look at him, this man who had seen her and wanted her for exactly who she was. His face was lined now, weathered by decades of sun and wind, but his gray eyes still held the same warmth and intelligence that had drawn her from the beginning. "Not for a single moment," she said honestly. "You gave me more than I gave up. You gave me a life I never thought I could have. Partnership, family, love. You made me happier than I knew I could be." "You did the same for me," Xander said. "I built this ranch thinking it would be enough, but it was just an empty structure until you came. You filled it with meaning, with purpose, with life. You are the best thing that ever happened to me." "We are good together," Lydia said. "The best," Xander agreed. "Like rope. Different fibers twisted together into something unbreakable." They sat in comfortable silence as the sun set over the valley, painting the sky in shades of orange and gold. Their grandchildren's laughter floated on the evening air. Smoke rose from the chimneys of their children's homes scattered across the ranch. The workshop, now run primarily by Emma, still turned out the best rope in California. Everything they had built, separately and together, spread around them like a living testament to the power of taking chances, of being brave enough to trust someone else with your heart. Lydia thought about the woman she had been, alone in her workshop, surviving but not living, and felt grateful to that long-ago cowboy who had stood on a dusty street for 3 days, watching her work, working up the courage to speak. "What are you smiling about?" Xander asked. "Just thinking about the day you asked me to twist my future with yours," Lydia said. "Unbreakably." "It has been unbreakable," Xander said, squeezing her hand. 30 years, and I love you more now than I did then." "That is because we have been smart," Lydia said. "We have maintained our individual twists while working together. That is what makes rope strong. If all the fibers twisted the same direction, the rope would just unravel. But when they oppose each other, balance each other, they create strength." "You and your rope metaphors," Xander teased. "After all these years, you still see the world through twisted fibers." "It has served me well," Lydia said. "It helped me understand that 2 independent people can come together without losing themselves. That partnership does not mean sacrifice. It means balance." As darkness fell and the stars began to appear, their grandchildren were called home by their parents. Lights winked on in the scattered houses. The night sounds of the ranch settled around them, familiar and comforting. Lydia leaned against Xander's shoulder, feeling the solid warmth of him, the steady beat of his heart. 30 years they had been together, and it still felt like a gift, like something miraculous that she had been lucky enough to find. "Let us go inside," Xander said eventually. "It is getting cold." But they sat a few minutes longer, neither quite ready to leave the peaceful evening. Finally, Xander stood and helped Lydia to her feet. They walked inside together, hands linked, steps matched after decades of walking side by side. The years continued to pass. Lydia and Xander grew old together, watching their children raise their own children, watching their business empire expand and prosper. The rope workshop became a fixture across California, known for quality that never wavered. The Twisted Y Ranch became one of the most respected horse operations in the region. But more than the business success, more than the material prosperity, what mattered was the family they had created. Their children were close, their grandchildren numerous and happy. The ranch was always full of life, of laughter, of love. When Lydia turned 60, Emma organized a celebration that brought together everyone whose life had been touched by the rope maker of Skidoo, miners whose lives had been saved by her rigging, cowboys who swore by her ropes, apprentices who had learned their trade at her hands. The church in Darwin was packed, and person after person stood to tell stories about Lydia's skill, her integrity, her kindness. Xander watched his wife's face as she listened, saw the tears in her eyes, and felt his own heart swell with pride. This woman who had been alone and scared, who had nearly let fear keep her from taking a chance on love, had built something extraordinary. Not just a business, but a legacy of quality and care that would outlast them both. "I could not have done any of it without you," Lydia whispered to him during the celebration. "You gave me the courage to be more than I thought I could be." "You always had the courage," Xander whispered back. "I just gave you a reason to use it." They were both 70 when Xander got sick. It started as a cough that would not go away, then weakness, then the doctor's grim diagnosis. His heart was failing, worn out by decades of hard work and clean living. Lydia refused to accept it at first. They had been together nearly 40 years. They were supposed to have more time. But as Xander grew weaker, she forced herself to face reality. Their time was not infinite. Nothing was. She moved his bed to the porch so he could see the valley he loved. Their children and grandchildren came to visit, filling the house with life and noise and love. Xander held each grandchild, told them stories, made them promise to take care of the ranch and the business and, most importantly, each other. "No regrets," he said to Lydia one evening as the sun set over the mountains. "Not a single one. Everything I hoped for when I stood on that street in Skidoo, watching you work, it all came true. You made my life complete." "You made mine complete too," Lydia said, holding his hand, feeling how frail it had become. "I love you. I have loved you from the beginning, and I will love you until the end." "It is not the end," Xander said. "What we built together, it will go on. Our children, our grandchildren, they carry us forward. The ranch will endure. The business will endure. The love we built together will endure." He died 3 days later, peacefully, with Lydia holding his hand and all their children gathered around. His last words were "unbreakably." And Lydia knew he was thinking about that day so long ago when he had asked her to twist her future with his. The grief was enormous, a physical weight that made it hard to breathe. But Lydia had learned over their years together that love was worth the pain of loss. She had 40 years of happiness, of partnership, of building something meaningful together. That was more than most people ever got. At Xander's funeral, Jacob spoke about his father's integrity, his work ethic, his love for his family. Emma talked about the way Xander had supported her mother's business, had never tried to diminish her or make her less than she was. Michael spoke about the lessons his father had taught him about balance, about working hard but not forgetting to appreciate what you had. And Lydia, standing by the grave as they lowered her husband into the earth, said simply, "He taught me that love was not about losing yourself in another person. It was about two people, each strong individually, choosing to walk together. Like rope," he used to say. Different strands twisted together into something unbreakable. That is what we were. That is what we will always be. After Xander's death, Lydia threw herself into work. It was what she knew, what had sustained her after her father died, what sustained her now. But it was different this time. She was not alone. Her children were there, her grandchildren, the thriving businesses she and Xander had built together. She lived another 12 years, long enough to see great-grandchildren born, long enough to see Emma's daughter take over one of the rope workshops, long enough to see Jacob's son win a major horse show with a twisted Y animal. She spent her final years teaching, passing on everything she knew about rope making, about business, about life. She told stories about Xander, keeping his memory alive for the younger generations who had not known him as long. She sat on the porch in the evenings, looking out over the valley, and felt his presence beside her as real as when he had been alive. When Lydia died, peacefully in her sleep at 82, she was buried beside Xander in the small cemetery overlooking the ranch. On her headstone, Emma had carved the words that had defined her parents' relationship. Twisted together, unbreakably. The rope business continued, passed down through the generations, the Rennick name still standing for quality and integrity. The Twisted Y Ranch continued, expanded by Jacob's children and grandchildren, still raising horses known for intelligence and endurance. But more than the business legacy, Lydia and Xander left behind a family that understood the value of hard work, of doing things right, of partnering rather than competing. They left behind children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren who knew that love was about balance, about maintaining your own strength while supporting your partners. On summer evenings, when the family gathered at the ranch for celebrations, someone would always tell the story of how it all started. How a cowboy stood on a dusty street in Skidoo for 3 days, watching a rope maker work, gathering his courage. How he finally approached her and asked to buy rope, but really wanted to buy a future. How she was scared but brave enough to take a chance. How he told her they could twist their futures together, unbreakably, and how she said yes. And the youngest children, hearing the story for the first time, would ask if it was true. Did people really fall in love just from watching someone work? Did love really last 40 years? Did two people really build all of this together? And the older generations would smile and say yes, it was true. All of it. Because sometimes, when you find the right person at the right time, when you are brave enough to be vulnerable and smart enough to partner rather than dominate, you can build something that lasts not just a lifetime but generations. Something twisted together from different strands, each maintaining its own integrity, working in balance to create strength that will not break. Something unbreakable. Something that endures like rope, like love. Like the legacy of a rope maker and a cowboy who found each other in a dusty mining town in California in 1882, and chose to twist their futures together, creating something beautiful and strong that would last long after they were gone. The workshop in Skidoo eventually closed as the mines played out and the town faded, but by then, there were Rennick workshops in a dozen towns across California and Nevada. The original workshop was preserved by the family, kept as a museum of sorts, with Lydia's tools and her father's tools before her, and plaques explaining the techniques that had made their rope famous. Tourists sometimes visited, reading the story of the woman who had built a business empire from a small wooden shed on the edge of a dying mining town. But what drew people more than the business story was the love story, the tale of partnership and balance that had been the foundation of everything else. Because in the end, that was what mattered most. Not the money or the fame or the business success, though all of those were good things. What mattered was that two lonely people found each other and chose to build a life together, supporting each other's dreams, balancing each other's weaknesses, creating something together that was greater than what either could have created alone, twisted together, unbreakably. Like the very best rope, like the very best love,